The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 7333 in the name of Christina McKelvie on End Revenge Porn Scotland. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. Ms McKelvie, if you're ready, I'll give you 7 minutes to open this debate, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Our everyday language is peppered with phrases rooted in the technology we constantly use. There is a preponderance, though, of fruit, apple, orange, blackberry, and it all sounds rather cosy and friendly. But there is a much blacker selection of terms that we have all become more aware of. Online porn, online grooming, cyberbullying, and more recently we've become conscious of revenge porn. Social media and all the photo messaging apps that go with it mean that an image can go viral in minutes. Fine, a great idea and an ideal way to share your holiday snaps with friends back home or to send family pictures to your children in Australia. And I don't imagine that there is anything sinister in the minds of the developers who create these apps. But in every positive piece of technology, there seems to be a built-in backlash. This time, it's revenge porn. A couple, in the privacy of their own relationship, may choose to take private pictures or make videos for their own viewing. There is no question of exploitation, assuming they are both over the age of consent, or of an act that is involuntary or exploitative. Then the couple break up. Separation can bring out ugly and vengeful emotions, but taking those private pictures and videos and putting them on display across social networking sites requires a particularly malicious and abusive mindset. And make no mistake, revenge porn is every bit as abusive as any other kind of domestic violence. Freedom of speech, freedom to protest cannot be translated into cyber abuse, as some would try to argue. These actions are exploitative and cruel. They ruin lives, they cost people their self-respect, they cost people their jobs, and in some cases they have cost people their lives. Twitter and Facebook may give us all the right to express an opinion, however bizarre or unpopular it may be. It gives no one the right to post pictures of ex-partners without either their knowledge or consent. It is not a licence to abuse. Personal use of technology in its many forms is very difficult to police. It is so easy to press that button, post that picture up, yet the sad and tragic tales of those who have been exposed to revenge porn tell us how utterly devastating the effect can be. Victims are humiliated and controlled just as they are in a physically abusive relationship. Scottish Women's Aid is to be commended for its innovative campaign against revenge porn. A mini-site within the SWA main website was launched in July. Its purpose is twofold: to reinforce the fact that sharing private moments with a partner isn't offensive, making them public without your knowledge is. And secondly, to encourage more victims to come forward and tell their stories so that more people understand what is going on and just how abusive it is. Decades ago, domestic abuse wasn't talked about or recognised. Women walked into doors or fell downstairs. Things have moved on, although, and there are still, sadly, people in abusive relationships who are too frightened to come forward. Their confidence has been eaten away by their partners so effectively that many end up convinced that somehow the abuse is all their own fault. So it is vital that this new Stop Revenge Porn Scotland site gains maximum profile. That's why I'm having the debate in the Chamber today. As prevention worker Ellie Hutchison, certainly can.
Elaine Smith.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. I apologise for not being able to stay for the whole debate. I wonder if the member would agree with me, though, that pornography in general is part of the spectrum of violence against women and children and must be challenged as such.
My friend and colleague Elaine Smith will know that my answer to that is yes, unsurprisingly, as it's something we have both agreed on for many, many years. And as prevention worker Ellie Hutchison from Scottish Women's Aid puts it, domestic abuse is about the purpose of such behaviour. It's about control and humiliation. It's about power. Like a punch or a kick, the threat of or actual distribution of images is purposeful. It has meaning, it has intent to retain and gain power and control. You will have heard the argument that women somehow bring abuse upon themselves. They present themselves to be kicked and abused or even raped. It's their own fault that they are allowed those pictures to be taken or that they didn't leave their partner after the first instance of abuse. This kind of shaming and humiliation feeds perfectly into the mind of the abuser. She asked for it. Of course she didn't. Trying to force the responsibility onto the victim doesn't work any more effectively in cyber terms than it does in physical terms. Ellie Hutchison has seen this issue come up time and again. She says one of the most consistent questions that women are asked is, why did you send or take those pictures? To me, this is just a variation on the why does she stay theme, with added shaming around female sexuality. It places all the responsibility on the victim rather than the perpetrator. It keeps his actions hidden and normalises his behaviour. This is not an accident. This is sexism. These victim-blaming statements stop us talking about the men who do it, stop us challenging the websites who host these images, and stop us exploring ways to prevent it. It's up to all of us to speak out against victim-blaming and to change the conversation. The question we really need to be asking and answering is not, why did you do it? It should be, why does he think it's okay? Revenge porn is a harmful form of bigotry and sexual harassment. It exposes victims' sexuality in humiliating ways. Their naked photos appear on slut-shaming sites. Once their naked images are exposed, anonymous strangers send email messages and threaten rape. Some have said vile messages like, first I will rape you, then I will kill you. Victims internalise these feelings and demeaning messages. I heartily commend Scottish Women's Aid for fighting against revenge porn and making sure that the message is loud and clear. You did nothing wrong having private moments with a partner. They are wrong for sharing those moments with anyone else without your consent. It's a crime, and it will take time and consultation to work out the best legal response. For the moment, there is a Scottish legal framework that can help victims using existing legislation. Discussions are ongoing in the US, where revenge porn is illegal now in New Jersey, and the state of California is considering introducing similar legislation. That may be an approach that this Parliament, working together, would possibly consider if it feels it's appropriate. I urge you all to look at www.togetherwecanstopit.org. Put on your story, put on your picture where you're telling people they're not to blame, and I commend this resolution to the Chamber.
Many thanks. I now call on Jackie Bailey to be followed by Joan McAlpine. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And let me start by congratulating Christina McKelvie for securing time for this important debate, and actually commend her on a very thoughtful speech. Could I also join her in commending Scottish Women's Aid for their campaign, which I understand is probably the first in the world. Now, I think we can all agree across the Chamber that revenge porn is a very unwelcome phenomenon of the digital age. It's shocking to see the extent to which domestic abuse can be perpetrated using social media and new technology. Now, we know that domestic abuse is about power and control, and the consequences can be physical, sexual or emotional harm. But it would seem that power and control now extends to new forms of communication, whether that's Twitter, Facebook or other social media. But sexual or intimate images used by a partner to threaten, to intimidate and to embarrass by distributing this to strangers and in public is frankly abhorrent. But it is a new form of exercising power and control. Just imagine for a minute what it must feel like to have such intimate images shared with all and sundry, and the horror of other people thinking that it's okay to then abuse you in turn because of images a former partner may have posted. That betrayal of trust is truly awful. People subjected to revenge porn are the victims. Christina McKelvie was absolutely right. They deserve our sympathy, they deserve our support. But we should also, frankly, Presiding Officer, be angry on their behalf. We must do all that we can to stop this insidious new form of abuse. We must ensure that revenge porn has no place in our society. I believe we collectively need to create the conditions for women and others to come forward to report abuse and to get support, and to feel that they will be supported in so doing. It is equally essential that agencies likely to deal with the consequences of revenge porn, like local government and the police, are appropriately trained and sensitive to the needs of victims. Too often, They don't know what to do or what the legal framework is. So there needs to be practical knowledge of support services. There needs to be a clear understanding of the law and the protections that are already in place, notwithstanding the need to maybe look further. But whether it's the Communications Act of 2003, the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act of 2010, or the Protection from Harassment Act, there are existing legal remedies that could be used. The question for me is, have we used them? Have we measured their use? Do we actually begin to understand the scale of the problem and what the barriers are to people reporting? What more do we collectively need to do to ensure that there is appropriate action? And I would invite the Minister to consider those very points. What more can we do to ensure that there is robust enforcement of the existing law, or indeed if we need to consider more legislation in this area? And I was struck when I visited the website at some of the victim stories, and let me share with you Holly's story. He started posting explicit pictures and a video of me all over the internet, along with my full name, email address, job title, and specific details of where I worked and how far along I was in my PhD programme. For 3 years, damage control was a full-time job. I hired a lawyer to send him a letter. I begged and pleaded with 3 different police stations to file charges against him, and I hired an internet specialist to help me take down the material. Ultimately, those avenues were dead ends. We need to take Holly's story and the stories of many other women besides her and act on them. It is up to all of us to speak out. It is up to all of us to make sure that revenge porn is stamped out and has no place in 21st century Scotland. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Joan McAlpine to be followed by Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to congratulate Christina McKelvie on bringing this debate to Parliament and to Scottish Women's Aid for raising awareness in its campaign. This isn't an easy subject to discuss and debate, but it's important that we speak about it because revenge
Microphone,
porn, like every other form of porn, is a way of degrading, abusing and therefore controlling women. One shocking aspect of the Women's Aid briefing on this matter is the revelation that women who are subject to revenge porn are often asked why they consented to the images being made in the first place. But I agree with Christina McKelvie that that is a classic case of blaming the victim. It's quite clear that consent in such case was limited. The consent does not extend to sharing images with anyone other than the person involved, and certainly not with the wider public, let alone the world, via the internet. However, I am pleased that there are legal remedies. Unlike some countries, Germany, for example, Scotland doesn't have a law specifically drafted around revenge porn, but we do have a number of other laws. As Jackie Bailey suggested, that perhaps not enough people are accessing the legal remedies, and I would also commend Women's Aid for explaining the kind of remedies that people do have. For example, the number of recourses, including public indecency, breach of the peace and other offences under the Criminal Justice and Licensing Act or the Communications Act. And Women's Aid also tell readers that there was a precedent set in 2012 with the prosecution of a man in Dundee for posting images to Facebook of his ex-partner. And of course, there are always civil remedies such as interdicts and defamation actions. Offering that guidance is a form of empowerment, and it's absolutely vital that in these crimes, because the perpetrators set out to disempower and humiliate women. The website also contains an uplifting and affirmative message to victims who, as a result of social norms, often blame themselves. It says, "It's not you who should have known better. It's not you who was silly. You are never to blame. You are never wrong to make an intimate moment with someone. They are wrong to abuse, share this, or threaten to do so." Finally, I would like to say something about revenge porn in its wider context. We can't separate it from the growth of pornography generally. The biggest porn industry is in America, partly because of the size of the market and partly because of a constitutional right to free speech that has been exploited by pornographers. Now that the internet crosses national boundaries, most of the big internet service providers operate according to American norms, and we have seen an explosion of pornography around the world. According to one estimate, there are nearly 25 million porn sites worldwide, and they make up 12% of all websites. Sebastian Anthony, writing for Extreme Tech, reports that Xvideos is the biggest porn site on the web, receiving 4.4 billion page views and 350 million unique visits every month. It's estimated to account for 30% of all web traffic. Is it any wonder, therefore, that the broader online culture is also deeply sexist? We got a glimpse of that recently in the Twitter row when women were abused simply for campaigning to have a female image on Bank of England notes. It was indicative of a much larger problem. If I can finish by quoting Danielle Keats-Citron, Professor of Law at the University of Maryland, who has extensively researched the subject. She writes, "The harassment of women online is a pernicious and widespread problem. It can be severe, involving threats of sexual violence, doctored photographs of women being suffocated, postings of women's home address alongside the suggestion they should be raped, and technological attacks that shut down feminist blogs and websites. Cyber harassment is a uniquely gendered phenomenon. The victims are overwhelmingly female, just as the users of pornography, I think it's about 85%, are male. At the heart of revenge porn, therefore, lies a problem of male attitudes to women. And until we manage to tackle that effectively and challenge misogyny wherever we find it, then this phenomenon will not disappear. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now calling Margaret Mitchell, to be followed by Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by congratulating Christina McKelvie for bringing this extremely important debate to the Parliament this evening, and by doing so highlighting the Scottish Women's Aid campaign to end revenge porn in Scotland. For the avoidance of doubt, revenge porn covers a situation where, say, a partner or ex-partner deliberately distributes to others images or videos of a sexual nature without the consent of the subject of these images. In effect, the images are made public. With the advance and proliferation of modern forms of communication, there are a host of different ways these private images can be made public, by posting online and social networking sites such as Facebook, or on specific revenge porn sites. And images also can be sent via email and text, as well as being sent by post. Distressingly, these images, in whichever form they are made public, are often accompanied by the individual's name, address, or place of employment. Clearly, this would be horrific for any individual who is the subject of revenge porn, regardless of age. But Scottish Women's Aid are particularly concerned about the impact on young people. This is a very real issue, as evidenced by the NSPCC investigation, which revealed an increasing pressure on girls aged as young as 12 to send sexual explicit images to their boyfriends. In addition to this, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre have highlighted the existence of 70,000 still and moving indecent images of children created in the UK last year, a fifth of which, some 14,000, were self-generated. Given this, there is an urgent requirement to educate our young people not only about the dangers of giving someone else possession of such an image, but also of ensuring that young people learn about and appreciate the importance of establishing healthy, compassionate relationships based on mutual respect. In such relationships, there would be no question of either party being coerced into taking an indecent picture of themselves, nor would either party consider making an image of their current or former boyfriend or girlfriend public as an act of revenge. Significantly, Presiding Officer, as the Scottish Women's Aid campaign points out, the threat or the actual distribution of such material is a form of domestic abuse in terms of the implicit humiliation and control involved. Scottish Women's Aid therefore seeks to reassure women who have been victims of revenge porn, an issue which affects men as well as women, but in much smaller numbers, as Joan McCallum has pointed out, that this is not their fault and that there is support and help available. Crucially, the Scottish Women's Aid campaign places responsibility firmly back on the perpetrators who made the image public without consent. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, once an image is put online, it's incredibly hard to remove it, as it may have been downloaded and saved on other computers. So in fact, it never really disappears. The loss of dignity, the impact upon reputation and the effect that revenge porn can have on an individual's working and personal relationships cannot be undone. I therefore very much welcome Scottish Women's Aid's campaign to support women who have been victims of this atrocious act and hope that they can encourage more people to come forward and seek help. In particular, I support the call to look at how best to secure prosecutions for those involved in deliberately sharing images made public without the subject's consent.
Many thanks. I now call on Sandra White to be followed by Kezia Dugdale.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I can congratulate also my colleague Christina McKelvie for securing this debate, and I also congratulate and welcome people from Scottish Women's Aid for the landmark campaign against revenge porn. The first, I think Jackie Bailey had mentioned this also, the first of its kind in the UK, and I thank them and others who have supported this going through. Presiding Officer, abuse, sexual, domestic, physical, emotional, is absolutely abhorrent, and the perpetrators must be punished and the victims must be protected. And when I look at I'm on the Justice Committee, and I will look at the Victims and Witnesses Bill currently going through the Justice Committee, which is basically looking at putting the victims at the heart of the justice system. I think in that particular bill, which is going to stage 2 and is open to amendments, I don't know, I'll possibly put the Minister on the spot here, but maybe we can look at that particular bill and the amendments, and perhaps together we can get something forward that would look at this particular crime, which, as I said, is absolutely abhorrent. But we also must recognise that revenge porn is a new form of abuse and an area that really must tackle. People have given examples, certainly Scottish Women's Aid has given examples also, but you know, there must be nothing more horrifying when you've shared a loving relationship with a partner, sometimes years down the line, even as some of the stories have said, that they post this on social website medias to see, you know, pictures of yourself being posted where other people can see a private moment. I think, as Christina McKelvie said, must be absolutely terrifying and horrifying also. It's not just the fact they put it on social media sites, they send letters, they post them out, they email, excuse me, as well, not just to the person themselves, but to workmates also, as we've already heard. And they put personal, you know, basically material there also about where you work, your name, your age, your address. Excuse me, it's absolutely horrifying, and it is almost like being stalked through social media websites and not someone being there. And that brings me on to some of the issues which was raised in the handout that we got from Scottish Women's Aid. I think others have mentioned about the legal remedies, and certainly there is some legal remedies, but I would like perhaps some clarification from the Minister, because it mentions the Communications Act 2003, which my understanding is that is reserved and not devolved to the Parliament. So I'd like a wee bit of clarification on that particular one. And it also mentions about the Criminal Justice and Licensing Act 2010, which looks at stalking and abusive relationships. Now, perhaps we can fit something into that particular act also, because I think it's really important that we support these women. They know they've got the support. They know about what's happening here in this particular campaign also. But we do something that actually, you know, legally, that protects these women, because it is undoubtedly women rather than men. And I want to commend Joan McAlpine's contribution, because absolutely it is another form of pornography. It is another form of abuse by men. And until we can rectify that and perhaps educate, as Margaret Mitchell said, you know, men and partnerships between people, then we'll never get rid of this type of porn. It'll just move on to something else, or this type of abuse. So I would like to ask the Minister, she would look at the issues that are raised there, and perhaps collectively in this Parliament, we can put something forward to the 3 bills that I've mentioned, particularly the one that's going through at the moment through the Justice Committee at stage 2. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call on Kezia Dugdale, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And like others, I'd like to congratulate Christina McKelvie on securing the debate, but also on an excellent contribution. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like others, I'd also like to recognise the work of Scottish Women's Aid, not just on the issue of revenge porn, but on the wider issues around domestic violence. And I think their power and their worth as an organisation has done us all a great service in the last 2 weeks, actually. And I think we need to recognise that in the debate tonight. I'm personally very grateful to them for supporting an event I recently hosted in the Parliament called Next Generation Feminists, which they played an integral part of. And I think we're on a cusp, if not right in the middle of a new phase of feminism being an in thing, where there's a lot of national campaigns, and we need to make sure that we capitalise on that. And that's the campaigns like the Lads Mags campaign, it's the Everyday Sexism campaign, it's No More Page 3, it's Women on Banknotes, and the rape threats that came from that, and the way in which that started a discourse around the power and the threats that social media pose. I read in the paper this morning that in Westminster, No More Page 3 are encouraging all the female MPs to, whenever they find a copy of The Sun in the House of Commons, to stick a No More Page 3 sticker over page 3. I wonder if there's enough women in the chamber tonight to make sure that any page 3 newspaper might look somewhat different in the Scottish Parliament after tonight. And in that, there's a point, Presiding Officer, because as much as I really welcome this debate, I do feel a little bit, looking around the room at my sisters, that I'm preaching to the converted. And if we do have a new phase of feminism, we need to make sure that we use that platform wisely and it has an impact on the people who have the power to affect change. So, I think we need some brothers in the room, and particularly brothers in some of the boards of multinational corporations and media outlets, to be listening to this debate and using the power they have to change things for the benefit of everyone. On the issue of revenge porn, Presiding Officer, I just wanted to talk very briefly about the role and the responsibility and the education that we provide young people around healthy relationships. I've done quite a lot of work recently on cyberbullying. And I visited a school in Edinburgh fairly recently, Craigmount High School, where I was shocked to discover that every single pupil had an iPhone or a 3G smartphone-enabled bit of technology in their pocket. 40% of the pupils had their own iPads or laptops, which they had exclusive use of when they went home at night. And I think we need to understand that technology is developing at a far faster rate than society's ability to cope with it. And on issues like revenge porn, on new media, we don't truly understand, I think, the impact that's having on young people and the people exposed to it. Cyberbullying is an example of that. The impact of cyberbullying is dark, it's subversive, it bubbles under the surface until it explodes in the most dramatic way for a young person. It's destroying lives, and often it's too late. Parents don't necessarily understand the technology. They think that if their child is in the room upstairs, they're safe because they're not outside, but they're exposed to dangers that they don't necessarily understand. Teachers perhaps don't know the dangers that new media poses and therefore don't know how to address it in a classroom environment. But there's something about healthy relationships, about how we teach sexual education in the classroom environment that needs to understand technology. If you're getting involved in a relationship with a partner for the first time, you're experiencing that sense of trust for the first time, what's okay, what's not okay to share, where the boundaries are. These issues are smashed wide open when you apply technology to that and you give a child a smartphone with the power to take a picture that can be around the world in seconds. So I think we need to understand the technological impact that this has on how we teach sexual health education, how we ensure young people, particularly young women, grow up with a sense of confidence and self-esteem, and that their control over their bodies is theirs and not men's, in the way that Jackie described so eloquently when she talked about power and control being at the heart of the domestic violence debate. So I appreciate my time's running out, Presiding Officer, but I just wanted to say that my colleague Richard Simpson put to the Education and Culture Committee a suggestion for a parliamentary inquiry into cyberbullying. I hope that that's something that the committee will consider and accept, and if they do, I wonder whether or not we can factor in the issue of revenge porn and its impact of young people into that committee's work. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Shona Robertson, Minister. You have 7 minutes, or up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First of all, to convey my thanks to Christina McKelvie for securing this debate and bringing what is a very important and timely matter to the Parliament. The contributions this afternoon have been very thought-provoking and very useful indeed. Maybe a shame that there's been no men contributing to the debate, but I think it's important that we build, well, there is a consensus, but that we perhaps widen this issue to others within the Parliament, and there's been some very helpful suggestions about how that might go forward from tonight. I also want to congratulate the Violence Against Women organisations, Scottish Women's Aid, Rape Crisis Scotland, Zero Tolerance Trust and Women's Support Project, who have done so much to bring revenge porn and other forms of violence against women to our attention. Using the new media such as Twitter and Facebook, Scottish Women's Aid in particular has reached thousands of people with information about revenge porn. Their mini-site has been very successful in stimulating debate and raising awareness. I understand that Ellie Hutchison from Scottish Women's Aid is going to deliver a seminar on revenge porn for officials in the Scottish Government next month, which I'm sure will be very informative and useful as we take this matter forward. Violence against women involves a wide range of crimes and behaviours, as has been said by many. Some are centuries old, others are newer and constantly developing and changing. It reflects the worst of humanity that some of us manage to find ways to pervert innovations such as the new media and forms of instant communication, which should be a positive thing, but turn them entirely negative. I'm sure pretty much all of us have taken a photo on our mobiles and shared it with family and friends. Something as simple as that can give a lot of pleasure, keep us in touch with people we don't see regularly, and extend our connections out with our own circles. But revenge porn is particularly worrying as it combines forms of humiliation of specific targeted women with the general increasing acceptability of objectified images of women. And it adds to the current very worrying trend, which has seen women receiving rape and death threats on Twitter simply for expressing entirely legitimate views or even because of their appearance. And I'm sure we've all been appalled by these subversions of social media and the misogyny that they reveal. Revenge porn therefore affects us all. Whether we've been directly affected, it affects us all as women, and the societal attitudes towards women that are impacted upon things like revenge porn. And of course, we're all affected by a prevailing culture in which images of our bodies are used in a variety of negative ways. But men too are adversely affected. Thankfully, it's only a very small minority of men who are abusive or violent towards women. But those who are not often feel unfairly accused or that they're being lumped in with a group of men that they abhor their attitudes of. Violence against women impacts on the relationships between men and women, as does anything which prevents true equality between men and women. So while all men are not the problem by any means, all men do have a role to help end revenge porn and other forms of violence against women. Men often ask what they can do, apart from obviously not using abuse or coercive control in their own relationships, but the answer is quite straightforward. They can challenge their friends when they show round objectified images of women. They can act and not just be a bystander. And of course, in addition to the women's organisations I mentioned earlier, there is also work in Scotland aimed at supporting men to challenge their peers. The White Ribbon Scotland campaign signs up men to pledge not to use, collude with or remain silent about violence against women. There's also the Mentors in Violence Prevention project, which the Violence Reduction Unit has been piloting successfully in a number of schools. An MVP trains young people in high schools to act as champions of non-violence and safely challenge their peers about their attitudes and behaviours. As many in the Chamber will be aware, we're currently developing a violence against women strategy for Scotland, and that will bring together commitments from all partners across a range of directorates in the Scottish Government, but also COSLA, Police Scotland, NHS Scotland, and of course our important third sector partners. And this will be the first such document in Scotland and will shape the way in which we tackle violence against women in the years ahead. It will reflect the new realities in which we're seeing women controlled, harassed and humiliated through the new media, the accessibility and reach of which have transmitted men's abuse to a world stage. And I think that is a good place for us to look at how we take forward the issues that have been raised this evening. And of course, the new strategy will reinforce the links between all forms of violence against women, as has been touched on very importantly tonight, from whether it's domestic abuse, rape, sexual assault, to honour-based violence and commercial sexual exploitation. We know that women experience a spectrum of violence and that many women experience many forms over their lifetimes. And we do believe that pornography, because it objectifies women and commodifies them as available for sale, is a form of violence against women, with its consequences reaching much further than the women involved in its production. Revenge porn is therefore a very obvious example of the spectrum of violence against women and an important issue of concern. I think it's the mark of the effective women's organisations that we have in Scotland that this has been so quickly identified from the very real experiences of women and brought to our attention. There is, of course, a lot of debate at the moment about what kind of country we want Scotland to be. And for me, I'm sure this is shared with everyone in this chamber, that we want a Scotland where violence against women doesn't happen, that it's simply unthinkable and consigned to the past. That we want a Scotland where no woman ever finds intimate pictures have been distributed to the world in revenge to humiliate them. I want a Scotland where no women will be threatened with rape or death because they have expressed views or because they are simply in the public eye. So we've got some work to do to reach that Scotland, a vision that I'm sure we all share. But I think what's been really positive about tonight is that the consensus that there is, not just in here, but within the many organisations out there and the many communities out there, that we can work together to make that happen. I suggest that the new strategy is a good starting point. There's been some very positive suggestions made tonight, which I'll make sure are taken forward, and I'm sure the committees that have been mentioned in terms of their work programme will possibly want to look at this very, very important area. And I think from small beginnings from tonight's debate, hopefully bigger things can come from. Thanks.
Many thanks. I now close this meeting of Parliament.